I said I would abide by the jury decision, and I will do that. Ish, for now. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, Steve hosted an episode this week talking about one aspect of the Hunter Biden pardon by his daddy. I'd like to take another approach to this because I think that this says something about Biden's party at its core that I haven't heard talked about too much yet. I will agree with Steve in that the president has unlimited constitutional power to do what he did. I'm not challenging that. I'm not saying that he couldn't have done that. And honestly, if one of my kids were in a jam and I was given the opportunity to pardon them, yeah, I'd probably do that. I probably also wouldn't stand up in public and say I wasn't going to do it.
There you go.
But here's the thing. Bill Clinton years ago pardoned his half-brother Roger, who had been found guilty on cocaine charges. Donald Trump pardoned his daughter's father-in-law, Charles Kushner, on tax evasion and other crimes. But my understanding is, Stephen Green, both of these people had already served time on this. And most presidential pardons in general are done as kind of a way to wipe the slate from something that happened in the past, not to get somebody, in most cases, out of punishment that hasn't been levied yet, or honestly, to prevent them from being charged with other crimes, as we see in this case, because the president did not only pardon his son from the gun charges, where he was able to acquire a gun by lying on a federal form about his addiction, but also on the tax charges, where he was taking in money that he was not reporting to the IRS. And, so President Biden also said that he was going to issue clemency for anything that his son might have done in the last 10 years, from January of 2014 to January of 2024. Steve, here's what got me about this. Guns, Democrats, big fans, not big fans of guns. I would say Democrats, not big fans of guns.
Well, not of you and me owning guns.
That's right. Government funding. Democrats, big fans of government having a lot of money? Yes. These two core issues are involved in the Hunter Biden pardon, giving him a pass for violating, the Democrats are always concerned about more gun laws, and here we have a guy who violated the gun laws. The Democrats also say the government needs more funding to do all that it has to do. Here we have a guy who cheated the government out of funding, and the president ran and was portrayed as the guy who was going to restore normalcy restore democracy, restore the respect for law. It just seems, Steve, like this little act of, as he's now portraying it, a father who has an opportunity to do a kindness for his son.
But that's really not how he portrayed it.
Well, he said, I hope the American public can see that that as a president and as a father, why I would do this. He's also saying that he thought it was what Trump would call a witch hunt, that he thought his son was being persecuted unfairly. So he's calling into question the whole justice system. But I guess, Steve, my question is, how will the Democrats let him get away with this, basically going to the heart of three major things that really matter to them, and just doing so because he wants to, first of all, get his son out of trouble, but also get the government off of his own trail?
Well, before I answer your question, that's a great question, by the way. Let me tell you about my favorite pardon, because I love the fact that the president has this unlimited power to pardon for offenses against the United States. I think it's a final recourse for justice when everything else has failed. And I think that the founders were very wise. Not that it isn't ripe for abuse, as we just saw, but the founders were very wise to include that. And let me give you an example of my favorite pardon ever. My wife and I throw this big New Year's party every year, and last year's theme was Studio 54, the notorious New York City nightclub from the 1970s and early 80s. And to help us get in the mindset, figure out how to decorate the house and all this stuff, we watched this, I think it was on Netflix, documentary about the nightclub and about the two guys whose names escape me at the moment who founded this thing. And there are multiple interviews of this documentary with the IRS agent who put these guys in jail. And he was very matter of fact. He said, it's a nightclub. They skim 10, 20%. I mean, he's basically saying that we're the IRS. We understand that there's going to be a skim for a nightclub. It's why you start a nightclub. And then he says, these guys were skimming 80, 90%. They forced our hand is basically what this IRS guy is saying. And so they did their time. They served a couple of years each in federal prison for tax evasion. I mean, they had just money stuffed in the walls and secret compartments in the ceiling. They were just totally skimming everything. But they did their time, and one of the guys died quite young. The other guy, after he did his time, became a hotel guy, not a nightclub guy anymore. He started all these kind of upscale theme hotels, and he was very successful. And the IRS guy who went after him, or maybe it was the prosecutor, I think it was the prosecutor who took the case to trial, was one of the people who signed the petition to President Obama to pardon this guy for what he had done in the 1970s. And I thought that was beautiful. He did his time. He paid his back taxes. He established a new and very successful career, making people very happy in these great hotels. And is one of the very few things I will ever praise Barack Obama for. He pardoned this guy, and that's what should happen. Now, as to Democrats exhibiting integrity, which is kind of the point of your question, Scott, pardoning for gun charges, pardoning for tax evasion, all these key Democratic issues. You're expecting integrity. And I want you to just look back at the history of this party for let's just go back the last 15, 16 years. You're not going to find any of that. It's never been about it's always been about establishing a two-tiered system. There's justice for Democrats and the well-connected, for the uniparty, and then there's whatever crumbs the rest of us get. That's what they've been about since at least Barack Obama, probably longer. And I'm tired of the crumbs. In this case, we got to eat it. Biden was acting well within his power. The only thing other than the media, and I cover that in my segment, that annoys me about this in a fundamental way, the only thing that really annoys me is the fact that Biden's not really going to pay a political price for this. Gerald Ford paid a political price for pardoning Nixon for Watergate, as he should have. It was a brave move on his part. He spared the country a lot. He paid the price. Biden is going to, do that shuffle walk into the sunset, and sometime in the next 3 years, he'll probably forget any of this ever happened. I wish he would live long enough, and I wish his mind were strong enough for that entire time to understand what a wretched asterisk in American history his 4 years as president will be.
And Bill Whittle, I don't know that this is going to have any lasting impact as far as the Democrats go, but there are Democrats who are speaking out now saying essentially what Biden used to say about so many things. He would say, that's not who we are. And he's got Democrat legislators now who are standing up and saying, that's not who we are. I mean, you've gone to the heart of the Democratic Party when you're giving somebody a pass on guns and tax evasion. It would be as if a Republican president would pardon somebody who embezzled millions of dollars from the Pentagon, or who was taking big government handouts while mouthing platitudes about how we need to have smaller government and we shouldn't be dependent upon government. Bill, what do you think about this idea that this is not just between a father and a son and a president exercising his constitutional power, but it's really, in essence, it's a snapshot, it's a vignette of really what's wrong with political hypocrisy, in particular from this party?
I saw one commentator, and I'd credit him if I could remember the name, who said that the Biden pardon was the death rattle of elitism in America. And I thought that had a nice
good.
ring to it. It is further damage to the already astonishingly damaged Democratic brand, who lost blue-collar workers. They are no longer the party of the little guy. They tried to maintain this fiction that they've been trying to maintain since the inception of the Democratic Party, that somehow they're morally superior to Republicans, that they're the party of the rule of law. And all of those Democrats who said, look how noble we are, he's going to put his own son in prison because he's a man of principle, all those people are left with the rug pulled out from under their feet. I think the big issue here is that there is a conflict of interest in this pardon that needs to be looked at. And that is, of course, he's not just pardoning his son, he's pardoning his business partner. And we talked about this a little bit on Steve's show, but I want to get to the heart of the issue here, Scott, because Biden supporters are framing this as this is what a good father would do. This is so the question, it becomes a question of character. They're trying to basically say, well, yes, it is an egregious miscarriage of justice, but it's what any good man would do. And this is where a little knowledge of history comes in. So let's compare and contrast what Joe Biden did with his son Hunter with what Abraham Lincoln had to deal with during 1864 and 1865. Abraham Lincoln had lost a son while in office, lost his son Tad. It nearly killed Lincoln. It destroyed his wife, sent her insane. Yeah. She never recovered. And as his eldest son Robert got older and older, his son Robert insisted on joining the Union Army, and Mary Todd Lincoln utterly refused. She said, I cannot stand to lose another son. I simply will not abide it. And Abraham Lincoln said, there is no way that I can send other people's sons to go off and die without putting my son on the same platform. It is not something that is possible for me to do. I cannot ask a country of mothers and fathers to abandon their children to this meat grinder war and at the same time protect my son because I have the power to do it. I will not do it. And so his son Robert joined the army. And Lincoln offered to pay his salary as an officer. You know, he said, don't want it to come out of the pocket of the government. I'll pay his salary as an officer. Now, there was a compromise struck, which was to put Robert on Grant's staff. Grant immediately said, we'll take him as an officer and we'll pay him as a captain, and needless to say, he'll come out of Army pay. And you can argue that being on Grant's staff meant that you weren't in the front lines, but he was still exposed to fire. It's not that he was immune from this. And I bring this up only to say that Abraham Lincoln was a man of integrity who had the ability to protect his sole surviving son at that point, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And maintain the sanity of his wife and his household, and chose to do the right thing rather than the selfish thing. So I don't want to hear about this is what a loving father does. A loving father doesn't raise a son who's a cocaine addict, a frequent user of prostitutes, sleeps with his other son's wife, and commits all of these acts of corruption and so on. The ultimate blot on Joe Biden's record is not the fact that he pardoned Hunter. It's the fact that Hunter turned into the kind of person he is with a father like Joe Biden.
Yeah. And I'm going to disagree in part with what you just said, Bill, because I would say that there are good parents who have raised what we might call bad children. However, those parents then didn't go on to say, I will stand by as my son goes off to jail. You know, and I make a commitment to that. I will not try to interfere with that process. And somebody who has the power to do it, and this is the extraordinary thing, because Joe Biden has the power to pardon, and he explicitly, repeatedly said he would not. He told his spokespeople to say the same thing. His entire party mouthed that same thing, and then he turned and didn't do that. I have a friend from many years back who was convicted of grand theft. I think it was grand theft auto, if I'm not mistaken, and served time in a federal prison. And then years later, he was after he was out of prison, President Ford pardoned him. And he had, by that point in his life, after leaving prison, he had devoted himself to going back into penitentiaries and preaching the gospel and ministering to convicts who were serving time, and had built up quite a ministry, and then would go around the country and preach the gospel to all kinds of churches, who then helped him to go back into prisons and do this work. And President Ford recognized that by granting him clemency. That's really the kind of thing that pardons were meant for. It's really redemption recognized. It's not a protection racket. It's not trying to shelter somebody from the consequences of their behavior, but it's in its best circumstance, it's a recognition of a life changed, of time served and a fruitful use of that remaining time in your life. And to see this just make a mockery of that just makes me really sad. I think I would have been more impressed if the President of the United States had, I don't know how you say this without tears in your eyes, but it said, I didn't want my son's life to come out this way. I've got to assume some responsibility for that, although we don't control the behaviors of other people throughout their lives. But my son broke the law, and he owes money. He owes a sentence of some sort here. And I will do everything I can to pay that which he owes. I will step in any way that I can to absorb the penalty of his sin. Now, I know we're asking for Jesus Christ-like behavior from a simple politician, but acknowledgement of the breach of faith and acceptance of the penalty, and coming side by side with your son and saying, look, son, you did wrong. And I love you because I'm your dad, but these are the consequences of wrong behavior. And I will stand with you because I share, on a personal level, I feel a sense of responsibility for that. But you've got to take the consequences of what you've done. I just think this whole episode forms such a picture of the way to not do it, to sell out all of your core beliefs as a party, and then to excuse it by saying, well, the other party would come after him, or he was persecuted, or forgive me, I'm just a father who loves his son. That all comes across as really weak sauce. And I predict that this pardon will do as much to harm the Democratic Party, especially in the eyes of the increasing numbers of people who are drifting over into the Republican Party, as much harm as anything else that they've done in the past 10 years. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.